Choosing a seed blend for your food plot. That's this episode of Death by Bunjie. Oh, excuse me. In all seriousness, this is not going to be a video about whether one seed brand or seed company is better than another one. That's not what this is about. In my opinion, I firmly believe that pretty much every product on the market out there when it comes to seed blends is a good product. I believe all of the companies are honestly doing their best to give you the best product possible. The reason I think that's the case is because they have every incentive to do so. They're hoping that you will grow a really great food plot, that you'll shoot a big buck over that food plot. That's what they're hoping for, so that you'll come back and buy more seed next time. And then so you'll tell your friends about how great it was as well. Unless you're happy with the product, you're not going to give them any repeat business. So they have every incentive to go out there and make sure that they give you the best product possible. There are three different things I think you need to take into account. Number one is, what are your food plot goals? What are you trying to do with your food plot? What type of animals are you trying to attract? When do you want them to benefit from it, and that sort of thing. Number two, what type of equipment do you have available to go out there and plant the food plot? And thirdly is when you're going to be planting and how long you have for a growing season. So that's basically what this video is all about. Really, it comes down to two types of seed blends, two types of food plot crops. The first is the stuff that is perennial, like clover, for example, and chicory, where they're going to be around all year. They pop up on their own in the spring. They're there all summer. They grow. You got to maintain them like you do anything. But basically, they'll come up year after year if you do everything right. Those are going to be the higher protein crops generally the deer are looking for during the warmer temperatures. They don't like the high carbohydrate stuff then as much because it tends to increase their body temperature. It gives them more energy to burn, and that increases their body temperature. And in the summer they don't like that because they're wearing fur coats all year long. Soybeans, I think, fall into that category as well. And most of those crops in that category are also going to be what we call legumes, which are kind of like nitrogen fixers, they call them. They're basically crops that are going to be putting nitrogen back into the soil, and you're not going to be looking for nitrogen-rich fertilizers to feed those types of crops. So your clovers and your soybeans, stuff along those lines, fall into that category. Those are great crops to plant in the spring. You see my other videos about how to plant clover and do a clover food plot. But basically, those are things that you're going to be looking at if you're trying to feed deer up until the first frost. Now, once the first frost kicks in, that kind of changes things for deer. Those high protein ones don't have the carbohydrates. They want something that's a little richer in carbohydrates if they can get it. They're looking for something where it's going to increase their body temperature, help deal with the upcoming winter cold temperatures. That's when your higher carbohydrate food plot seeds are going to become more valuable. Your corn, your turnips, your radishes, all the wheats and rye and all that good stuff are things that deer are going to be looking for during the winter. Those also are going to be what we call brassicas, a lot of them. Your turnips and your rape are brassicas. Plus, they are not only higher carbohydrate, but those are crops that are going to require more nitrogen in the fertilizer generally. So they're a different kind of category. They're in that other category. They don't put the nitrogen back into the soil, they take it out. So those two really complement each other well, and I'm doing a video you'll see here on this channel here about food plot crop rotation. Pay attention to that. I think it's very valuable. Those are your two types of food plot seeds. I try to plant one or the other, and I don't try to combine the two of them in a food plot. There's really no reason why you can't. If you only have one food plot, then you probably do want to combine the two, but you're going to have to find seeds that complement each other well and can grow together. There are plenty of prepackaged seed blends that do that. So just look at that. But while you're looking at your food plot bags, those bags on the shelves, and when you're looking at them in the magazines and stuff, find out what's in them and find out what the manufacturers recommend in terms of when those seeds are going to be valuable. Like, when will the deer want those particular crops? Because if you're an archery guy like me and you hunt with a crossbow, you want something really valuable in September, October, early November. You're not going to be hunting over stuff in January so much, or in December in the rifle seasons here in Pennsylvania, that kind of thing. So you just take that into account. On the other hand, if you're a rifle hunter, then you really don't care about October so much here in Pennsylvania. You're more interested in what you can hunt over in November and December. So take that into account. You're not going to be wanting a lot of clover necessarily if you are a rifle hunter. Now, that being said, I look at food plots like an all-year thing. I'm trying to have as much food on the ground all year long to encourage the deer to come in here so that I have as much traffic, as much activity with healthy, happy deer who feel secure going through this property because that's the way I'm going to get the most looks at deer. And it's worked very well for me so far. So hopefully you can summarize your food plots. When you're looking at this, if you get confused, there's really just two different camps of food plot seeds of different types of crops. There's those that the deer are going to hit before the frost, then there's those that the deer will hit after the frost. You can kind of put almost everything into those two categories. Some of them stretch a little bit into each category, like some things like corn, for example, is no good until it's the end of the summer. It's no good in the spring, obviously. And whereas things like soybeans can be good all year long. So there's a good mix. There's a lot of different products out there. That's only part of the equation, though. The other thing you have to take into account when choosing what type of food plot to grow is going to be, what do you have the equipment to do? You can't plant corn as effectively by broadcasting it. You can plant it that way. Some of your row crops like corn and soybeans, they really benefit from being planted with a planter, something that goes in and does rows. So that way you can go back and you can spray the weeds with, you can get Roundup Ready soybeans, for example, in this day and age. Go through and plant those in rows, go through and spray all the weeds later on, and you got a really, really nice crop that's not competing with weeds. So that is part of the equation as well. You do have to take into account what kind of equipment you have. Clover, you can buy a cheapo over-the-shoulder spreader, go right up and down the ground on the bare ground in the spring and throw out that clover seed, and you can start a really good clover food plot that way. This year, a seed blend called Honey Hole from Antler King, which is one of those that second group of the brassicas, the ones that require a lot of nitrogen. But it had a lot of turnips and forage rape, stuff like that, and deer loved it. Deer peeled it right down to nothing over the winter, and I went back in the spring and frost seeded it with clover, and I've already got a little bit of tiny clover seeds coming, little leaves starting to poke up through the earth. So that's the way to start a great clover food plot. You can do that just with an over-the-shoulder spreader. You don't need a lot of fancy equipment to do it. I also have access to plows, and I've got access to a tiller. I have my own tiller for my tractor that I can till the ground with, and this year I'll be planting some Antler King's Red Zone, which is a larger seed. I'll broadcast that with the old over-the-shoulder spreader, and then I will go through and pack it and bury it with the drags and all that good stuff and cover it all up good, pack it down good, fertilizer, and it should be good to go. Did it last year, and it grew fantastically. Love that crop as well. But you got to take into account what equipment you have. Clover, if you don't have any fancy equipment at all, clover is where you want to start. The only other real consideration right off the bat I would think you would want to take into account if you are planning on planting a food plot is, when are you planting it? If you're looking at this video right now, it's April. Here we are close to the end of April, and things are going to be greening up here like nobody's business here real soon. Right here, I've already got some thick clover coming up right here in the well pad food plot where I had frost seeded it the second year in a row, and it's really growing up. It's a great food plot. If you're doing it in the spring, you can do clover, but don't try to plant clover in the fall with the expectation that you're going to hunt over it. You really want to plant clover in the spring. It takes a while for clover to establish some roots, and it's not one of those things that's going to be real palatable to deer in the fall if you plant it in August. So you really need to take into account what you're planting and when. Radishes, for example, food plot blends that have radishes in them, you might have to put those in the ground and get at least 30 days before the frost. On the other hand, if you're planting something with turnips in it, those might take up to 90 days to fully mature, so you're going to want to make sure you plant it in August or so, depending on when the frost is expected in your neck of the woods. But take into account, you can look up online when the frost is likely to occur each year, and then you can backdate it and figure out how much time you have to put a plot in the ground. There are things like some winter wheats and stuff like that you can plant with 30 days before the frost, and you'll have a nice crop. But some things do need quite a bit of time, so make sure that you give yourself the adequate amount of time and plant at the right time of year. A little bit of planning goes a long way with that. Well, I hope you found that helpful. I hope that you are planting some awesome food plots. I hope you will subscribe to this channel because I do some reviews of the food plot seeds that I've used in the past. I've got some of those coming up this spring here on this channel, so keep an eye out for that. You might want to like our Facebook page as well so that you can catch all the food plot action on there. I'll show you the clover on a weekly basis or so, talk about planting fruit trees, talk about an awful lot of interesting things related to planting crops for deer. on the Facebook page as well. So check out those two things if you haven't already. And until next time, all hail Bunjie!